Hello and welcome to the new episode of the Ambitious Sloth podcast. And today I'm really proud that Chun is today at the episode. And I met him at first in the lecture of life and death, which is usually a topic it's maybe not that everybody's familiar with, but somehow it really grabbed my attention. And therefore I've invited him to be on my podcast because I think a lot of these notions are really important and might also be interesting for some people to listen to. So welcome to this episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. It is a great honor for me to take part in the interview. To have a brief introduction to myself, I'm Chun from Hong Kong. I studied philosophy and English literature in the University of Hong Kong. And then I moved on to concentrate on philosophy and got my PhD from Canada in the University of Toronto. I've been teaching at this university, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, for over a decade. Basically, I offer a variety of philosophy subjects, including Chinese philosophy, Western philosophy, and the course Life and Death is actually an applied ethics course. So in this course, we explore different topics of life and death like suicide, abortion, euthanasia, and most important of all, the meaning of life and death. So this course has attracted quite a lot of undergraduates. I think this course is special because in high school or even in the university context, there are not so many disciplines would adopt this philosophical approach to help the student to find out their own meaning of life and death. So I'm very happy to be part of this course, and Julian is one of my best student in the class. I'm very happy to have this dialogue with him today.
And then maybe going on to the first question, right into the topic of life and death. So how did you start with philosophy in general, but also then later on went to the specific topic of life and death?
So I think I need to go back many years ago when I was a high school student. I remember at that time one of my teachers asked us to write a weekly diary. And later I discovered that in the diary, the questions I discussed were about what is truth, what is knowledge, etc. So later on I knew that these should be categorized as philosophical questions. And then when I entered university, I discovered that there's a discipline in which the scholars took these questions seriously. Out of curiosity, I enrolled to one philosophy course, the introductory philosophy course. But once I started the course, it's clear for me that this is what I've been after for so long. And for this reason, apart from studying English literature, I also study a lot of philosophy subjects. Then after my undergraduate study, I concentrate on philosophy for my PhD. And that is the path I took to this domain of philosophy. For the course Life and Death, this is a course I designed quite a period of time ago. This course is interesting because it tried to apply philosophical skills to explore the meaning of life and death. So not all students may be interested in philosophy, but it's quite unavoidable that they would ask some questions about their own life and possibly the death of their family members, relatives, or friends. So in this way, from the questions the students are interested, I can attract them to use the philosophical method to explore the topics. So I found this course quite useful in attracting the youngsters to reflect further the meaning of their life and death. And this course is one of the popular general education subjects on campus. And at the same time, we have also developed MOOC, the massive open online course on the edX. So we have an online version as well as a campus version going on at the same time.
Yeah, for me it was also really a special or new topic which I haven't looked into so far. So that was also maybe also why I took it, but also in the course outline or the topics I could choose from was that really standing out as something different. And I think that's also maybe why it attracted me a bit, like, oh, since I'm in Hong Kong, I want to try something new into like this direction. And so it was obviously a really good choice, otherwise I wouldn't have asked you to be in the podcast. But then maybe going right into the course itself, what the first question that came to my mind when I basically reviewed it was, do you think that life itself is absurd? That was one of the first prominent questions I had, and was really different than everything else I thought before. Can you like elaborate on that a bit?
Okay, I think the question whether life is absurd itself for many people is an absurd question.
Yeah.
So long as you don't reflect on the meaning of life, you just keep living on. Once you start thinking about your existence in this universe and also what you have been doing in your lifetime, then suddenly you may realize that there's something quite unexpected that happens in your life that you couldn't make sense of it. In that sense, life starts to become absurd, and that would keep you looking for solutions and meaning of your existence, right? So in this course, the absurdity of life is a topic that have been discussed by two different philosophers. One is Thomas Nagel. So according to Thomas Nagel, we can adopt two completely different, even incoherent perspectives on the meaning of life. One is the subjective internal perspective. By this perspective, we would consider our existence as the center of the universe. Whatever happened to your personal life, you would interpret it as the most important events, right? On the other hand, if we adopt the external objective perspective on our individual existence, we realize we are very trivial. We are one of the billion of people in this universe, right? So Thomas Nagel thinks that it's never possible for us to combine both perspectives in order to develop a coherent understanding of the value of our existence. And he calls this the absurdity of life. On the other hand, we also discuss the existentialist Albert Camus, who tried to tell you that life itself is absurd. For Camus, I think this is something positive, because once you realize life itself is absurd, then you would try to solve it, try to break the absurdity by giving meaning to it. For Camus, life is absurd because, on the one hand, human beings are meaning-searching animals. We want to make sense, make meaningful everything we do in our life, including the people we contact or the things we try to do in our career. On the other hand, the world itself doesn't come with meaning. It's simply something physical, dead matter around us. So when the meaning-seeking animals, like humans, try to look for meaning from something which is meaningless by itself, it generates absurdity. So for Camus, the only solution is to take action and give meaning to your life, that is the only way to solve the absurdity of life for him. So we see two different positions. For Thomas Nagel, the absurdity of life is irremovable. You cannot have any solution. But for Camus, it has a solution. It all depends on whether you have the determination of your will to take action and then try to inject meaning into the meaningless world around you. So this is two different positions we had discussed in this course, and I think either one could motivate us to have further reflection on how we position ourselves in this universe, and especially how we find out the meaning of our life.
And how do you do this? Do you adopt one of these positions, or do you have a different perspective on the absurdity of life?
Yes, I think I tend to agree more with Camus. That is, we could find out a solution. If we adopt Camus' position, then we know that even for Thomas Nagel's problem, that life is absurd, we may adopt a synthetic understanding of the two perspectives so that life actually becomes meaningful, exactly because we can switch between the internal and the external perspectives whenever we need it. So if we don't see the two perspectives as against each other, instead each can help the other to make sense of our life, then I think we can have an answer to Thomas Nagel's challenge.
What I also then heard, or I think also thought of, is that maybe the death or the basically limited time we can live, it basically gives the life meaning itself just by showing that it is finite. Because if it would be eternal, then there would be maybe no direct meaning, or we didn't feel the need to do all the things we want to do, or the really meaningful life.
Yeah, so I'm happy you brought up this question. So for people, maybe for some people, if life is longer, it would be better because it would give them more opportunities to do something different or undo something, right? But if we think a little bit more carefully, a longer period of time for our lifetime would not change the general nature, because it still means that there's an ending. So longer lifetime doesn't make a big difference or real difference. So people pursue this line and then try to think, how about eternal life, right? But we need to be, again, very careful here. When we talk about the eternity, it means that there's no ending, right? In that sense, it means that our lifetime basically can exhaust all logical possibilities of different experiences, right? In that sense, for some people like Shelley Kagan and Bernard Williams, they think that that would make our life very boring, because sooner or later we would repeat what we have done again, right? Even if you say, okay, I would change my choice of university, but if your life is unlimited, right, then you would have the chance to study all the universities in your whole life, right? Then sooner or later we would have to face the same situations, right? And then at that point you would ask, what is the point of your existence? Yeah. Right? So it's more complicated than the general conception that an eternal life is always better.
Yeah, so then for me also it's really interesting to see that if there is no afterlife, so we basically really having a finite time in our life, that makes it also really urgent for us to do all the things we want to do. And for example, in nowadays would cut off, if we think about it, would cut off a lot of time of wasting in front of YouTube what we don't even want to watch, or just general what we might think is not important. And so basically given then there's no afterlife, in my opinion, it really urges one to focus on the current life, on the current moment, and really enjoy that, because then you don't waste all the other time because it's finite. And then also maybe coming to the next one is, if we think that there is an afterlife, do we then maybe privilege the future more than we do the present moment? Because if we imagine that there would be an afterlife, we might push our our ideas, our opportunities in the future, just to not do it right now, because we think what basically everybody says all the time: I do it someday or later, and basically push then the happiness maybe further away. If you say, I do this vacation later in life or something like that. Yeah. Do you see it similar to that?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point. So you mean that if we have the afterlife, eternal life, then this would demotivate us to do things that we should have done, right? So you are right that if we have an eternity of life, then tomorrow means something very different, because every day would have a tomorrow, infinitely, right? Yeah, yeah. So people may tend to stop doing anything meaningful. I think this perception in general is very good, but if we are talking about philosophy, then there would be a challenge. Why? For those people who think that only if there is afterlife, our present lifetime is meaningful, right? But if there's no afterlife, no future life, then whatever you do now would be meaningless, right? So even if you try to do as many things as you could, that doesn't make your life any more meaningful. So for those people, they would argue that it's better to have the afterlife to make your present lifetime meaningful. Otherwise, it may look like a bit futile to struggle within this lifetime to make your life meaningful, because whatever you do still leaving your present lifetime meaningless for those people.
But how can then an afterlife make the current life more meaningful?
For the sake of argument, right? For those people, they may think that only if you do something which would not disappear, then the value could be kept, so long as the agent still around, right? But if you would absolutely disappear after you die, whatever you've done would disappear together with the value, and that would make your present lifetime. Right. Okay. But this is a philosophical point, right? It's quite hard. In general, we would not bother to think in that direction. Yeah.
It's quite hard to put this into the current active life. Yeah. But then maybe going into how we can actually do that, or seeing a person who did that, is, for example, Steve Jobs. So you also mentioned the speech of Steve Jobs in our course. Can you maybe tell us a bit about what Steve Jobs said in his speech and what you also took out of?
Yeah, I think Steve Jobs' speech in the commencement ceremony of Stanford University is a very good one. In the speech, Steve Jobs talks about 3 very simple stories about himself, but there are deep meanings about the stories. So the first one, he mentioned the importance of connecting the points. That means you don't know what would happen in your future, but so long as you can take your life seriously at every moment, then the meaningfulness of your present lifetime would, or the meaningfulness of your present period would show in your future life, so that looking back, you can connecting all the meaningful points. So the assumption here is that we need to take our life seriously at every moment. The usefulness of that we may not be able to predict, but in future, looking back, we would see how that happens, right? So the first lesson is that we should live our life to the fullest whenever possible, right? The second story is about his personal life, but I think one important point he tried to draw is you need to love what you do and do what you love. I think for all successful people, they tend to have this type of principle. People who always complain about their life, part of the reason is that they couldn't find something they love, but they are sort of forced to do it, like in a career, right? But it takes the determination of the will and the courage to identify what is truly your love. So long as you try to do that, you will be able to find it sooner or later. So this is the second story. And then the last one is about death, right? I think Steve Jobs is a very good example of applying existentialist philosophy. He keeps asking himself if this is the last day of his life, would he still do the same thing? If this is not the thing you would want to do, if this is the last day, it means that you need to change it. So you see, these three stories are actually connected with each other. So for Steve Jobs, death is a very useful tool for you to keep your life to be a successful one, right? You should change your life if it doesn't fit you, and you don't know that it doesn't fit you unless you take it as the last day and then you will reflect, right? So if we put all these three stories together, that is a very good strategy for us to have the courage to be authentic to ourselves, our identity, our aspirations, and then we will not be influenced so easily by other people's general conception of what life is. So I think Steve Jobs has done a very good job in spelling out a proper conception of the meaning of life, and he himself is a very good example, a model.
Yeah, and what he also said during his speech was one sentence, basically what I think fits all in this, all this together, is when you look in the mirror in the morning, and all what you want to, or what you have to do later in this day, does not feel right, and you don't want to do it, and this happens too many times in a row,
Right.
you should change something.
Yes.
And I don't know, I feel really this is something also really useful for every day, what you can do, but that puts the value of the life in a different light, because he then says basically, if that would be my last day today, do I still want to do this? And this is then, if that basically doesn't happen, if that does happen too many times in a row that you don't want to do this,
Right.
then you should change something.
Yeah, I think Steve Jobs' case or stories is also a very good one, in the sense that it shows that even if life is not eternal, you can still make at least today meaningful to you. But if life is eternal, then you couldn't use death as the motivating item, right?
Yeah.
Or force to keep you grow and to be successful or to make yourself better. So Steve Jobs' case sort of related to the questions you asked previously.
Yeah, and yeah, then what is maybe your approach to the meaninglessness of life? Like, how do you do this?
Now again, if this is a philosophical question, then
maybe know a bit
maybe
more
you don't want
on
to
your
be philosophical.
maybe know a bit more on your perspective on that. I mean, we heard about the perspective of Steve Jobs, and maybe what is your approach, especially you know so much about the philosophy behind it. How do you use it yourself in your daily life?
Yeah, but still, we need to clarify a little bit about the question.
Okay.
If they ask what is your approach to the meaninglessness of life, it sounds like you already assume that life is meaningless.
In a sense, yeah, to the certain extent of, for example, Camus or Thomas Nagel, that are absurd in a sense, and therefore it's hard to find a meaning.
I think that there are different ways to approach to this question, but I think one way is just to think when you say life is meaningless, it already suggests some meaning, some value to you. Even zero value is still something for you to start with, right? So there seems to be something paradoxical about this question. Then if you say life is meaningless to you, it means that life is nothing. Life still got something. And when you ask whether life is meaningless or what should I do if life is meaningless, the whole process of answering or asking this question is itself making the assumption that life can be meaningful, right? Otherwise, there's no point to ask what you would do when life is meaningless, right? So that's why I say it all depends on how we interpret the concept meaninglessness of life, right? So assuming that asking this question, there is still a possibility that make your life meaningful or not so meaningless, right? That would already be a very good starting point to answer this question. That means you can try to do whatever you like, and whatever you like can sort of qualifying the nature of this meaninglessness. So I think some existentialist philosophers also adopt this approach. Given that life is meaningless, and if you don't succumb or follow this idea, then whatever you do can be considered something against this assumption, right? So that some people may say, if life is meaningless, it's pointless for you to do whatever you do now. Therefore, you don't need to do anything.
And then life would already be meaningful, or at least not as meaningless anymore, right?
Yeah, if you want to say then life is not that meaningless, it means that the reflection itself already encompass or define how you understand the meaninglessness. This process itself could generate a second order meaningfulness. But of course, for the existentialists, they would say that when most people expect that you don't need to take life seriously, yet you still take it seriously, you would sort of have a revolution to revolt, and from that point, you make your life meaningful or more meaningful than other people's life. Something like that. So you see there's a dynamic in the whole process. Possibly because human beings are meaning-generating animals, right? So long as you don't you don't simply become a person defeated by the environment, right? basically you can change the world. Right. So to answer your question, what is your approach to the meaninglessness?
Your personal approach would be great. Your personal approach. Do you use this notion, what you just explained? Also, maybe at some point, did you use it yourself to make yourself meaning in life, to create it, or how do you use it personally?
I think whenever we come across challenges, difficulties, or setbacks, I think if we can stick to the principle that action would generate meaning to you, right, there would always be a point for you to be positive and active. Right. In another sense, you tell yourself, don't be defeated by the difficulty of your life. And this mentality itself got some value, some meaning. And that should form a platform for you to pursue further. Right? So it all depends on how you understand the world. And then the world actually is defined by each of us. How you look at the world, and then the world would give you feedback, right? So this is a dynamical process of making life more meaningful or less meaningful.
So you would say the whole process of how we approach life or the world, it itself gives us feedback in the sense of it reacts on our intentions, on our mindset, what we have towards the world, our life in general.
Yeah, maybe we use another analogy. So we can say we are the author of our life. Our life is a book. So everyone got a book with all blank pages, right? So if you keep thinking that life is meaningless and do nothing serious, then at the end of the life, your whole book will still be blank, right? But if you try to do something, write something about your own life, then when you die, you would look back and see that your own book is filled up with something meaningful and different from other people, right? So so long as we try to take the initiative and consider ourselves as the author of our own life, we can always generate meaning, at least to ourselves.
This is a great analogy, and also then, I mean, we only in first place need to generate meaning for ourselves, right? Because that is how we also judge whether our life is meaningful. So yeah, I think it's really a great analogy, especially for me also, to think about that we can basically create our life just by doing something maybe a bit more serious and writing it down. Maybe also how you started in the beginning with writing down your weekly journal. That maybe was the start of this whole thing as well.
Yes. So there's a continuity,
exactly,
right, of our whole life. So it's worth putting efforts today, because that would affect our tomorrow and the future. And even when I was a high school student, I always have this sort of thinking. I should work hard today so that the self of tomorrow would be thankful to what I did in the past. And then, of course, when tomorrow becomes today, you still have this mentality. You want to do something your future self would feel grateful to your past self. That will make your whole life more energetic and meaning-making. Yeah.
Maybe then going on to the last part of the conversation is, I mean, we talked about a lot about now the meaning, or what gives you, with the analogy of the book, also maybe a bit of power or influence on your whole life. But maybe what is your most influential sentence or maybe analogy you heard that gives you or the power to change something or to feel meaningful?
Yeah, I think in this context, I will give the example of two sentences. The second one is try to explain the first one. So I think in this course, I mentioned this statement: the meaning of life is to give meaning to life, right? I think this is very important. This statement tells us that life's meaning is not given. It always depends on our action. To give, right, is an action. But then we need to understand how to fill in the term meaning, the meaning of life, the meaning, right? For myself, there's another statement by Immanuel Kant. For him, he once said that there are two things that keep him in awe: the starry heaven above him and the moral law within him. So the starry heaven, you may try to understand it as nature, okay, physical nature, right? And then the moral law is something about your conscience, also about your freedom. Because in philosophy, when we talk about morality, it seems to assume that we got freedom to make moral judgment and decision, right? So I think when we talk about the meaning of life is to give meaning to life, then you may ask, what is the meaning, right? For me, if you keep the curiosity about the physical nature, there's always something we can ask about the universe, right? This is part of the meaning that we can gather. The other part is about the special thing of humanity, right? The moral law. Of course, there's some technical meaning by Immanuel Kant when he talks about moral law, because for him we are the lawgiver of moral principles, right? So long as we keep an eye on these two aspects of our life, the physical nature, the physical laws, right, and also the morality of us, and you can see that there would always be a conflict actually between the two. If you take the physical nature to define the animal nature of human beings, right, then you immediately see the conflict, the ideal of morality and the down-to-earth animal drive, right? But the interaction between the two actually define the meaning of our life. How you master the relationship between the two would define our individual life's meaning. So I think I would use Immanuel Kant's statement to explain the first statement, that I think is a very good one. Whenever you stuck with problems in your life, think of the first one. That means you still have the power to be the agent to change your life. Yeah.
And then as next one, related to the podcast, is what does an ambitious sloth mean to you, and or do you see yourself related maybe to an ambitious sloth?
Of course, for me, this term got some internal tension between the two words, right? Ambitious sloth. We know that sloth is an animal whose movement is very slow, got intrinsic limitation to their life. But then the other part is ambition, ambitious. I think it's good to put these two sort of a little bit contradictory terms together, because to a large extent life is just like that, right? You see this type of tension everywhere. I remember when I offered a course about art. One way to appreciate art is to see that there's always conflict, tension, contradiction in terms of the artist's expression of the topics. They always want to put something dynamical in the artwork so that we would keep thinking, reflecting on the meaning of the artwork. So I think this sort of tension, when we positively interpret it, would make our life even more meaningful. So this is the way I try to look at this. the tension gives you the momentum. Of course, the sloth leads to keep looking for the identity. How come the movement is so slow, right? But the ambitious part would make that particular sloth special and unique. Yes, so this is my way to interpret this term.
That's very
I think this may be part of your rationale. How come you have this sort of interesting combination of the term?
Yeah, my notion of that was that I always also have the internal conflict between being ambitious, trying to do something, trying to maybe also create meaning for my life, but on the other hand, also need the breaks and relaxation to maybe enjoy then life as well, not just creating the meaningfulness, but also enjoying what you've created already, and then can sit back and relax and seeing it. So there's always the conflict between those two of creating a lot new things, what you really engage with and what you want to do, but also realizing what you've done already.
This is a very, very good thought about how to make sense of this. So I think, so how to strike a balance between these two would define your life's meaning.
Yeah. And then maybe as last one, where can people maybe contact you or get in touch with you if they have more questions to what you said before already?
Yeah, so currently I'm working in the General Education Center of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So you can contact me through email. I don't know whether in the video we can have this.
Yeah, or I definitely put it in the description then.
Yeah, so it's easy. So if anyone wants to talk about the meaning of life with me, you're very welcome to contact me through email.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's great.
Thank you.